A family in Leicester suddenly find themselves overwhelmed by an unseen guest, seemingly capable of the unimaginable, the ability to conjure water out of nothing. This is the case of the Leicester Hydro-Geist. In the past, I've covered all manners of poltergeist cases, including ones that throw potatoes, ones that love to toboggan, and even ones that seem capable of starting fires seemingly from nothing. Curiously, this leads me into the topic of this video. These pyrogeists are not that uncommon. Going back to the 1800s, you will find numerous cases of fires being blamed on invisible, unseen entities, poltergeists. In the 2008 book, Poltergeist and the Paranormal, an entire chapter is dedicated to detailing the numerous fire-starting entity cases that exist. Just a few years ago, a Russian couple claimed they were being harassed by a particularly nasty pyrogeist who chased them from their apartment. Accounts of these fire-starting poltergeists seem to pop up every few years. What's less common are cases involving hydro-geists, or poltergeists that appear capable of manifesting water, seemingly from nothing at all. The most interesting case of a pyrogeist that I'm aware of occurred in August 1933 in Leicester, England. The case was actually covered by the UK media, including the Western Morning News and the Leicester Evening Mail. Samuel Long, a 74-year-old retired barman, was living with his wife Annie and their 13-year-old adopted daughter in their small house in Bell Lane in Leicester. The place was in good condition, minus one minor problem: water. 1 year earlier, in 1932, Long had a brand new floor installed in the kitchen. Soon after, the floor began to inexplicably flood with water. Long could not understand where the water was coming from. A plumber was eventually brought in to assess the situation. He managed to stop the water problem by placing an air brick under the floorboards. Sadly, though, he was not able to determine the source of the water, though he believed, possibly, it might have been caused by a hidden spring underneath the house. Long thanked the man for his work, and then, as people tend to do, he put it out of his mind and carried on with life. Things would take a very strange turn, however, for the Long family when, one day in August 1933, the bedroom ceiling began to gush water. Samuel was a little shocked, as anyone would be, but he was a reasonable man, and so he chalked it up to a leak in the roof. It hadn't actually rained in weeks, so he knew the excuse was flimsy. It just didn't hold water, pardon the pun. But what else could it be, he thought. Curiously, the flooding stopped in the bedroom and immediately picked up in another room, leaving the bed underneath completely drenched. It continued to spill water, and then, as it had done earlier, it just stopped. Samuel likened it to a person turning on and off a tap. A check of the ceiling revealed that it was bone dry. The sudden eruptions of water continued for the next few days, randomly exploding out of the ceilings and walls, drenching everything in the room. Many of the family's belongings, including a piano, were damaged beyond repair. Their beds were soaked through to the point where the family sought refuge in the beds of their neighbors. Fed up, Samuel brought in a team of water inspectors to examine the house. He assumed the flooding was due to a burst pipe or a leaking water tank, and he was hoping that they would finally be able to resolve the issue so that they could get back to some level of normalcy. The inspectors came but didn't have much luck. The Longs' home was not equipped with an indoor shower, a bathtub, a toilet, nor did they have their own water tank, so the normal culprits of where the water could be coming from were immediately ruled out. Even stranger, they determined that there were no water pipes running across their ceilings. The inspectors might have thought that the Long family were dousing their furniture themselves, had they not seen it and felt it themselves. In fact, during their examination, at least one inspector was nearly knocked down the stairs by a blast of water, which shot out of the wall. All were witness to these random eruptions of water coming from the roof, walls, and even the floor. Ultimately, they were unable to track down a source and left more confused than when they had arrived. Samuel Long, talking to reporters, described the water as, quote, like escaping steam. And it wasn't just a couple of glasses of water, but gallons. It was not unusual for the family to collect 50 or 60 gallons of water off the floor at the end of the day. The situation got so dire that the Long family were eventually forced to temporarily move out. Representatives from the local health and building departments were brought in to make a thorough search of the home. All agreed that there must be some kind of rational explanation for the spurts of water, and they were determined to find it. By now, the press began to sense that there might be something paranormal at work at the Longs' home. Samuel told reporters that he did not want to flee his home, and only did it because it was becoming too dangerous to live in a house constantly being flooded with water. With regards to the supernatural as an explanation, Samuel, apparently a skeptic, admitted that the idea of ghosts and spooks did not frighten him. And the moment the experts were able to determine the real cause, he and his family would be returning to the house. He was adamant that he would not be run out of his house by ghosts, water, or anything else. Sadly, as with the other experts called in previously, these inspectors were unable to find a source for the flooding. The walls and floors were completely sound, and they did not appear to have any pipes or holes that would allow for water, especially the volume they were seeing, to flow with such ferocity. Long mentioned the idea of there being a hidden underground spring, to which the inspectors scoffed. If that was the case, they reasoned, why weren't any of the neighboring houses also having the same problem? A water engineer who came by to look at the house suggested that sparrows and other birds had blocked up the house's spouting with their nests, causing accumulated rainfall to leak into the house. His theory sounded good, but it simply would not account for the gallons and gallons of water flooding the residence in the middle of a drought. Nor would it explain why the water seemed to literally erupt from the various locations around the house, in rooms where people often seemed to be occupying. It just didn't add up, and nothing made sense. At least one theory, that the flooding was being caused by an invisible house guest from a spirit realm, one capable of manifesting water seemingly out of thin air and turning it off and on at will, made sense. This theory was given even more credence when a visiting water inspector began joking about ghostly visitations. No sooner had he finished laughing about it when water cascaded from the roof, drenching him. The Longs continued to live elsewhere for a period of time. The incidents of spook water, as Samuel Long began referring to it, seemed to all but cease while they were away. When Long would return to check on things, he'd find that the flooding had stopped completely and things appeared to be completely dry. At some point, Samuel determined that the phenomenon, natural or otherwise, had been resolved somehow, and he, his wife, and his daughter felt it was safe to move back in. Within days of returning, the water eruption started again, and it seemed even worse than before. On some days, the floods would appear every half hour. The Leicester Evening Mail sent a reporter out to the Longs' home at the peak of the flooding, and he described what he'd seen while staying at the house. The floor was flooded, and Mr. and Mrs. Long were unable to sit down to a meal because of the water which streamed down upon them. I was taken upstairs and only just dodged a shower of water which fell from the ceiling of the landing. All the beds had to be covered with waterproofs, which hold pools of water. Amid the scene of desolation, Mrs. Long's young daughter tried vainly to eat her meal in comfort, but was continually disturbed by water falling on her food and drenching the table. Mr. Long said that the water generally stopped flowing about 9 o'clock in the evening, and the walls were soon perfectly dry without any signs of disturbance. Samuel Long for the first time began to believe what was happening in his home was unnatural, possibly paranormal. As much as he did not want to indulge such theories, it did seem to him and the family as a whole that they were living under siege by a mysterious unseen entity. Samuel felt as though the entity was following him. Wherever he went in the house, streams of water would appear, drenching him and everything else in sight. When he ran to the garden, water suddenly shot from an outside wall and ran down his neck. Things would take an even weirder and more frightening turn when, out of complete desperation, the Longs moved in with some next-door neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Worrell. To their utter horror, within an hour of their arriving, the Worrell house suddenly began experiencing flooding. Jets of water spewed from the wall of the living room. In short time, the upstairs rooms were flooded. It was, said a witness, like a cascade coming out of nowhere. The Longs stayed, and following that first night, nothing else happened. It seemed, at least to them, their watery pest had departed, possibly back to their house. For the next 3 weeks, the Longs remained with the Worrells, and it was somewhat uneventful. The Longs' home was carefully inspected by various water and construction experts who noted that the flooding had completely stopped. In October, Samuel and his wife determined that maybe, possibly, whatever force that had been causing them so much anguish had moved on. They decided to return home once again. The family tried to settle back into a normal life. They began moving their furniture back and carrying on. Mr. Long recalled that they had just finished moving in the last piece of furniture, and he was busy making some tea when their unseen guest decided to make itself known again. Jets of water suddenly erupted from the ceiling, splashing down on Samuel and his family. Walls gushed with water. The kitchen became so flooded the family was unable to have dinner. By evening, the walls and floors quickly dried up. During the day, the family was up to their ankles in water, like fish in a half-filled aquarium. It seemed their entity was also a bit of a trickster, waiting for the right moment to pounce. Samuel Long ultimately concluded that they had to move. Their unseen guest had finally broken him. Samuel did not feel right asking the Worrells to stay with them again, though he had trouble finding suitable accommodations in such a short period of time. Rumors began to circulate in the area that the Long family had been engaging in some trickery. Samuel Long addressed this, telling reporters, "People are saying that we've done it ourselves because we want to get a council house, but that is not true. Why should we willfully ruin our home? We had just had part of the house redecorated, and we should not have done that if we'd wanted to leave. I have tried everywhere to get another house, but I cannot find one. I wish someone could get one for us. This thing is driving us mad." The family were forced to remain in the home, but that's when things slowly began to change. A ray of sunshine in their otherwise dreary and, dare I say, soggy existence. As if realizing that it had bested them, the Hydro-Geist began to ease up on the family. By November, the family experienced a noticeable decrease in watery output. In volume and intensity, the water flowed less and less with each passing hour, until one day, it stopped altogether. Samuel and his family had been through this too many times previously, and they were not quick to let their guard down. But as the days passed, the water ceased to flow, and the normalcy they so desperately sought returned. Soon things were getting back to how they were prior to the arrival of the unseen water spook. As winter set in, the Long family found themselves settling into a normal life. The water ghost of Leicester that had made their lives so miserable for so long had finally disappeared. Many paranormal researchers have long noted a link between young girls and poltergeists, as so many poltergeist cases seem to involve a family with at least one young daughter. As usual, skeptics eager to sell books happily dismiss such notions as merely teens trying to get attention. Of course, cases like the Long family water ghosts are less easy to wave away. It would be nearly impossible to set up a water system that sprayed whenever convenient without being detected. Remember, the teams of inspectors all witnessed it firsthand when the family were not even home. As far as I know, there were no explanations for what befell the Long family in 1933, and no conventional explanations seemed to be forthcoming. Was their 13-year-old daughter somehow responsible? Had she willed the water forth, conjured it, as it were? And did she direct it at her father? Remember, Samuel noted that it seemed to be following him. It's possible, but why would she not elect to keep herself dry? The reporter who visited described seeing her being unable to eat because she was being constantly pummeled with water. Unless the situation was out of her control, unless something else was manifesting in the water. I have read other cases involving mysterious floods, water appearing in rooms seemingly without a source, and at least one American case involving a young man who seemed capable of conjuring water. It was actually featured in an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. But this is far and away the most extreme case of its kind that I'm aware of. No doubt the sight of water erupting from ceilings and walls would be confounding, though with the paranormal, it seems anything is possible.